Welcome, AI Explorers, back to another episode of Conversations with me and my brother Warren. We're here at Tingenuity AI. If you've seen our content, please like and subscribe. Saying it now because I'm thinking about it and we always forget. So, but today we have a great topic, right? Which is artificial intelligence in popular culture and movies and things that we all enjoy talking about and thinking about. So what do you got, Warren? What's the first thing on your plate?
Well, as big nerds, you know, we there's always those really upfront Star Trek and Star Wars, and we've kind of touched on those in a past video. But let's dive into some deeper ones. Let's talk about things that are really maybe old. Lost in Space, for example. Let's take that one. Danger Will Robinson. You know, what does that robot look like? It was, you know, for the most part, very helpful to the family that was lost in space, and always kind of like, you know, it has that vibe of Lassie, where Timmy's in the well. Yeah, Timmy's in the well.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You know, there are those, and then we look at those older cartoons like the Jetsons, for example, where they have the maid. What is her name? Rosie. And
yeah, man.
So
geez, I don't remember that.
They're integrated into technology, and that's one of the things that I think people kind of gloss over and really dive into the concerned side of artificial intelligence, that the robots are going to take over, but they don't see the instances in popular culture where robots are the benefit or the help within that environment or that world.
Artificial intelligence, Terminator, Skynet, right? Like, but what about? And this was one of the reasons I think we brought up Star Wars and Star Trek, was because in Star Wars, like, AI is everywhere, like everywhere, like all of these robots, right? But you mentioned, what was one of the ones that came to my mind? Lost in Space is being remade on Netflix, and what I think is interesting is that the robot
has been.
Right. That's right. Has been remade on Netflix. And the robot in that series, and I don't know enough about the old show to know, but the robot in the Netflix series is not of human origin, or at least I don't think it is. And so, you know, is it an artificial intelligence?
I don't know enough about it.
Actually a life form? I don't know. I haven't watched it.
Well,
to know.
You talk about that. Is it a life form? And there's, I think I mentioned it before.
That's a whole separate
Star Trek
question.
Next Generation. Yeah, you know, we're in the episode A Measure of a Man, where Data is put on trial to see if he is a race of individuals. And it's a fantastic episode. It's one of my favorites, where Picard is he's the advocate for Data, and Riker is the prosecutor in that particular case, and there are just some key moments where Picard gives his final soliloquy at the end about slavery and race and all these other things, and then, you know, other pivotal moments where Riker finds out how to turn Data off, just click and he's done. And so,
which is mind-blowing.
You know, what is that going to look like in the future? And, you know, are we going to put those safeguards in play, or is it going to be a race? Probably not, because there's a quote or a scene, not a scene, but a moment where Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about artificial intelligence, and he says, you know, these are going to be so specific to certain functions that it's not going to be something as detrimental as, say, the Terminator robot or other robots. So. Right.
As we move towards artificial general intelligence, right? And from what I've read about this, everybody agrees that it's going to happen, but everybody disagrees as to what it looks like. And so it's interesting how you approach that point. And I think it's more likely, especially in the short term, that we're going to find ourselves making lots of different applications of artificial intelligence in different areas of our lives. So some other interesting looks. Let's talk about the negative. Let's talk about series like Terminator, right, where you've got a robot that's bent on destroying humanity. And then also the same thing with like movies like iRobot, you know, which is based on an Isaac Asimov book. But, you know, interestingly, and the 3 laws of robotics that Isaac Asimov had, which, you know, let's want to make sure I read these correctly. But
there's a philosophical debate on all of that, So, I mean, it's really going to dive into philosophy.
Right.
And some metaphysical things too, because, does an artificial intelligence have a conscience like we consider our conscience in the side of humanity? So it's going to be an interesting discussion for sure.
Well, and one of the things that I think is interesting about this discussion, right, is in the past, when you think about robotics, it applies to any robot, right? And robots, we don't look at robots today and think, oh, my Roomba has feelings, right? And so these are laws of robotics that apply to like artificially intelligent robots. It's this idea that this robot has, at least consciousness in some respect. So I think these laws are interesting. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Very interesting rule. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. These are just kind of interesting concepts generally. And when you've got a movie like iRobot where the robots kind of, I guess, develop their own laws or find ways around those laws, I think that that's a concern. I don't think it's particularly likely. And it's curious to kind of consider what other guardrails people might invent or put up around the programming of an artificially intelligent robot.
But, well, and that's all part of the artificial general intelligence discussion is what are those guardrails going to look like, and the biases that we as humans, as we create these programs and these deep learning artificial intelligence platforms, what is that going to look like, and how that will be suffused into society. I think people don't really understand how integrated artificial intelligence already is in our daily lives, because a lot of people have smart devices in their pockets. They're using wearables, the whole Internet of Things, where things communicate already. There's so much data out there, and as we get to where computers are smaller and smaller and memory is smaller and smaller, it's fascinating to see how much more integrated technology is going to be as part of our lives.
So one of the things that's interesting to me about the robot conundrum and the artificial intelligence kind of path forward is Sam Altman, apparently the leader of OpenAI, has apparently been shopping around trying to raise $7 trillion, which sounds like something a Bond villain would do, or frankly just a joke. But this is not. I mean, we're February 14th. It's not. You got to do the big.
Yeah, you got to throw $1 million.
Except this is $7 trillion. I mean, it's a lot.
Yes.
And so what's nuts about this is that the reason he's doing this is to create the semiconductors, the computer chips. And so even if you had, to have an artificial general intelligence that's capable of doing lots of things, you need a lot of computing power. Can that be carried around inside of a robot's body frame? How much battery power does that take? How much computing power does that take? What about software updates, right? What about general intelligence updates? And then if a robot gains experience, do you plug it back into the hive mind? You know what I mean? And so these are things that other companies are dealing with, like Tesla with the self-driving, or frankly, today any car company is obviously looking at these kinds of issues. Is how do we train our models and make them even better? But when I think about a robot, I think, well, there's limited computer power that you can fit in a humanoid robot that you expect to function in day-to-day life. So how smart can it get?
Well, that is an interesting thing. And it brought to mind computers of the past in the 60s, where a personal computer filled a room, basically. And part of our, it makes me think back to our discussion about the Library of Alexandria, where, it was the knowledge kept in there on scrolls and these larger parcels, things, books and whatnot, didn't fill a thimbleful of what we can store in a server tower right now. Right. So as we increase the ability to shrink and make smaller all of our technology, it'll be very interesting. But we're probably not there where we can, I see tethers. Yeah, you see the Boston Dynamics robot where they're pushing it around and stuff. And it's kind of awkward looking, definitely. I've seen other videos where Elon Musk's robot is on wheels, so you could thwart it by going up a gravel path, basically.
Right. So they're a long way from conquering us, what you're getting at.
Yeah. I mean, it's far from the movies where they're going to be so agile and dexterous that they'll get us all.
Well, it makes me think of Terminator again, right? Like in later iterations, right? The robot that comes back to the past is liquid, right? And so, how does the computer chip and AI system of that robot even work at all, right? It's
that's fair.
Interesting.
But you talk about that, and you look at, let's say, the recent movies with Marvel movies. At the very end, Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark is running around with nanotech, where his nanorobots create his suit on the fly, which
is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really dope. And we talk about beneficial artificial intelligence. You could look to the Marvel movies and see, the entire spectrum of that with the Age of Ultron, where it took the best and worst parts of Tony and just made a rampaging robot.
Right. At the end of that series, he just needed to stop inventing stuff. And also, we're not in danger of anything there just because vibranium. So.
Right.
But
That's
no,
right.
I think Marvel's a good source of information. I want to go back to one of your favorites, and actually, I owe you for this. I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, which you summarized by saying you will watch a monkey throw a bone in the air and wake up 2 hours later with a fetus floating through the sky. So I watched it in the middle of the day to make sure I'd survive, and I stayed awake the whole time waiting for something to happen. But this is where the famous line, I can't
let you do that, Dave.
Right, yeah, it's really creepy. It's an effectively creepy moment where you've got this onboard computer. And it's funny that how that moment is panned in later movies that also involve robots, like WALL-E, which I think is, frankly, one of the best places for that to come up. What?
Such a good movie, WALL-E, and I was thinking about that earlier. Here's this artificial intelligence that has a specific task, kind of like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but it achieves, because of its environment and it finding elements in the trash that provides it humanity, and we can see it develop humanity that movie is hilarious. In the first 30, and that's one of the things about Pixar with those earlier movies, is in the first 30 minutes, without a word of dialogue, they told such a fantastic story. And I mean, the same with Up or others. And having watched WALL-E in the theater, when WALL-E rolls over his only living companion, the roach, the visceral reaction from the audience was like, oh my gosh, they killed the roach. I can't believe it. His only friend. So that they could elicit such a reaction for a vermin tells you how good they are at storytelling.
But let's talk about some of the robots in that film. And what I think is interesting about the robots is, sure, they're trained for different purposes, but then they do develop like lives of their own. Like WALL-E definitely has a life of his own. But it's interesting that the robots in that film, I think even down to the security robots, they violate their programming.
For sure. Definitely they do. I mean, you look at the steering column in the captain's area, where it's like, oh no, we can't let you go back to Earth because of XYZ. And so it's making humans into this, but then there's the beneficial robots that are prompted by WALL-E to overthrow the bad robots and return humans to the planet to do whatever it is they're doing.
To plant pizza seeds. That's what it was.
To plant pizza seeds.
But it's interesting because I go back to the Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. So the second is a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, right? And which also assumes that a robot must obey its programming. And I guess that's one of the concerns, and it would take a philosopher or a computer scientist or both to determine whether or not an artificial intelligence could ever change its own programming and decide of its own accord no, I'm not going to obey orders from humans, or I'm not going to follow these laws, or whatever other laws might be invented.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Well, again, I think it's going to be a philosophical conversation where, what does that programming look like? What does it look like in our own minds? I mean, think about a human being. We are a supercomputer. We don't have the perfect recall that a server farm does. I mean, I can't recall every last instant of my life, right? So what does the human supercomputer look like versus a device that can have perfect recall or access areas where it can? And we do the same thing. We just do it with technology. We access information that we've stored on the internet to find out all sorts of things. And I mean, my family is always asking things like, what's the circumference of the earth, to the artificial intelligence devices that we have around us, and it's giving us that information. So right now, I don't think we're in any dire need. Maybe 150 years from now, we could look at the robot thing and go, oh no, they're going to take over. It's going to be the Cylons again, or from Battlestar.
Right, we're not in any danger of that. I mean, I think what people are most concerned about with AI today has to do with, frankly, images, influence, the ability to create content so quickly because we can see it. When it comes to robotics, I'm not sure that there's much to worry about because of some of the constraints we already talked about. Computing power, making enough of them for it to be an issue. Although, it will quickly become a concern when it comes to war and those kinds of things, because I imagine that making a device that operates on its own is probably a hop, skip, and a jump away from where we are today, currently.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to Marvel movies where they make the helicarriers have the targeting software that's going to, police the world based on predictive analysis.
Yeah,
again,
very much Minority Report style kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah, that one's a good one too. Not really AI, but yeah, that whole predictive analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the predictive analysis, I mean, that's what really these large language models do, is predict that next word and what's the best one to go with it. And I mean, that's what we do in conversations. We're predicting the next thing that would be relevant to the conversation, or so. I mean, we're all, like I said earlier, we're all supercomputers, but, how do we integrate it into our lives that it's not a scary thing and a beneficial thing? Again, they're popular culture ideas on both sides of that spectrum, the good and the bad, and myriads of them. And people, I think, focus on those bad because as humans, we don't like change a lot, which is kind of a funny thing, because we like the new and shiny, but we don't like change. So what does that mean?
It's interesting, that's for sure.
And there's this fear of what that frontier is going to look like, and there are those examples of the good and the bad. And I think people miss out on an opportunity really when they focus only on that bad side of things and not what can be beneficial to us.
Yeah, I think fear is the wrong motivator for life choices, is what it comes down to. But there are good and bad examples, right? So we haven't talked about the Matrix yet, but that's obviously an example of where artificial intelligent life forms have taken over humanity, and now they're just manipulating us, which is interesting because we're good batteries, I guess. Although you would think that, like, if humans are batteries, wouldn't the food that they give us also contain energy that the robots could use? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, and wouldn't the robots find some way of clearing the atmosphere? I mean, that was the whole thing of why they turned to humans as batteries, because we nuked the atmosphere and there was this nuclear winter.
If they're creating a complete simulation for us, wouldn't they devote at least a little computer power to fixing atmospheric issues?
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of these things. Recently, I saw a video where the person was talking about proteins and how they fed these proteins into the AI, and the AI has predicted mountains of different types of proteins that we haven't been able to configure yet. So we're seeing the application, and some of these, yes, those robots in the Matrix should have been able to clean up the atmosphere. They would just be running around with solar panels. So,
and then they'd have annihilated all the human beings, and there'd be no Neo. So that'd be the end of it.
Yeah, and there would just be a race of super robots. It's kind of like Mass Effect. It brings to mind with that the Geth, the robot platforms that are on that.
On movies, we haven't talked a lot about video games.
Oh yeah, there's so many more.
So many artificial intelligent robots in video games, all over the place. So
all over the place.
But when coming back to that topic, the fear or I guess faith for the future of what things look like, I prefer the stories where robots are alongside us, and I like the Star Wars, Star Trek versions where we're not afraid of this technology. It becomes a part of what we do, what we experience. I definitely think that, like the Star Trek Enterprise, hello computer, I see that probably as a likely future where, because currently people are like Echo, Alexa, and OK Google, and all this. That's already happening. And when you give those technologies artificial intelligence on top of that, and you can schedule and plan out your daily routines and your life in this kind of awesome way with the help of artificial intelligence, that's where we're headed. That's where we're going to see artificial intelligence really shine next.
Yeah, it's going to allow us more opportunity. Book that I'm reading talks about freedom from and freedom to, and artificial intelligence is going to give us the freedom to be more creative, spend more time with family, spend more time with our friends, do things that we haven't been able to do. So it's going to grant us, in my opinion, and I have a much more optimistic outlook when it comes to artificial intelligence and life in general, really. But I see these things as just helping me accumulate things faster or create content faster or come to a solution faster of a problem that I'm facing or a challenge or an issue, and moving on past that so I can get to those deeper things that I want to do, which could be any number of things. Sitting in my imagination, one of my favorite things to do is just sit in my imagination because it is quite vivid. And the artificial intelligence gives us that freedom to do so many more things and let the smaller things that are definitely important but shouldn't take so much of our time. Cool. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I'm an optimist. That's just kind of where I'm at. I could definitely see a world where artificial intelligence, and frankly, I'm impatient for it to arrive. Like, I think there are important guardrails around self-driving cars and other things. And so I'm okay with a slow adoption there because safety first, right? But I do believe that we're going to approach a future, and I don't know if it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years or more. But what I do know is that technology tends to outpace implementation. Like the internet was actually invented in the 70s, And when you just consider and ponder that, like, holy cow. And then it exploded in the 90s. So we're seeing a mini explosion now, but I see a larger explosion in the future when it comes to artificial intelligence. And, surely we haven't seen all of the negative side effects that might come about. And yes, there are a ton of movies about that, but we also haven't seen all of the positive side effects. Like you mentioned, finding proteins, but also think about what we would learn about vaccines, what we would learn about solving diseases, what we would learn about finding new elements, what we would learn about. So, you and I have been focused a lot on creativity because we are creatives, and that's what we're dealing with, generative AI in terms of Midjourney and ChatGPT. But also, like, as I've used it in my business, like, there are going to be so many applications of AI. There will be plenty of jobs. There will be plenty of fun, cool, awesome things to do. And I do think that if we play our cards right and we can learn to, there's a great TV show my wife likes, The Good Place. And there's a scene where I guess it's a neuropsychologist. I forget what her career is, but she explains to Eleanor, we've solved me versus us, right? We recognize that it's better to be in a group, but we haven't solved us versus them. We still divide into groups and combat with each other. And I think that to truly enjoy the benefit that might come from artificial intelligence, which is within reach, we have to overcome us versus them. And so the hardest part of artificial intelligence is not the technology, it's the people. And I really do believe that. And so we've got to figure that piece out. So those are my thoughts.
Well, you're totally right. I mean, we bring emotion, fear. Those are really determining factors when making decisions. People think they're logical, but we are not. We are bound in our feelings and those emotions that ride with us. So, but I also think at the same time that right now we're in a point where we look at civilization and we look at the uptake of artificial intelligence, generative intelligence, and how quickly ChatGPT and other platforms have found use cases faster than Facebook, faster than Google, faster than all these other things. And I see us on the cusp of, okay, well, if we integrate this into our lives, it can be beneficial for us. And I think we definitely need, as you said earlier, guardrails that are installed. But I think people are ready to integrate these things into their lives to better them, to, like I said earlier, freedom to do various things in our lives instead of being assaulted with the tedium of whatever that daily grind looks like. Agreed.
Well, thank you for visiting with me about this topic. It's always really fun. If
fantastic topic.
If you like the conversation, please like and subscribe. We're here every week. We share a Midjourney Monday video, and we also talk about some different aspects of artificial intelligence. Follow us here at tingenuity.ai on our website, where we have courses and materials and resources, and here on our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, for visiting with us, and we will see you around.